Welcome to the Latino Newsletter Podcast. This is your host, Michelle Zacarias, and today we have the icon, the legend, Dolores Huerta. She is a renowned labor leader, a feminist activist, one of the most influential voices of the Chicano civil rights movement. And after co founding the Stockton chapter of the community service organization in the 1950s, Dolores teamed up with Cesar Chavez and Gilbert Padilla to form the National Farm Workers Association, which later became the United Farm Workers. She played a key role in organizing the 1965 Delano grape strike, leading national boycotts, and negotiating historic contracts that improved conditions for thousands of farm workers. Her leadership has also helped bring about the California Agricultural Labor Relations Act of 1975, securing farm workers' rights to organize and bargain collectively. Beyond her union work, Dolores has spent decades empowering women and Latinos in politics, proving that change begins with courage and community. Thank you so much for being here, Dolores.
No, thank you for inviting me.
So let's get right into it. Um, let's talk a little bit about the work that you've done for so long, right? You've spent over 6 decades fighting for farm workers, women, marginalized communities. What is the unfinished work that drives you today?
Well, we know that we still have a lot of racial discrimination, sexual discrimination, LGBTQ discrimination, attacks on the environment. And now that we're seeing now with this Trump administration doing the ethnic cleansing that is happening right now, the growth of the prison industrial complex that we are now seeing in its full fury now with the attack on people of color. So God knows that we have a lot of work still to do. And it seemed like we were making progress, but now we are getting really pushback. And so, we know that right now that we have a lot of work to do and we can't stop now. We just got to keep on working.
It must be kind of bizarre to see so many steps forward and then steps back. What is it that you're seeing about like this generation of like labor organizers and activists that's different from some of the organizing that you did when you first started?
Well, labor is really in a really bad place right now. The labor laws that have been passed have really detain labor from doing the kind of organizing that they need to do. And so, they can go through the election process and the organizing, and then they win elections, like we saw with Amazon and we saw with Starbucks. And then the employers just refuse to bargain, and they can tie up the labor union for years and years and years. And so there has been a big dampening, you might say, of the organizing efforts of labor unions. And this is really bad. When we see the attacks on working people in the United States of America right now, this is detrimental because the majority of the population of the country are working people, are workers. And yet we see that with AI, so many workers are being displaced right now. I mean, mass layoffs with UPS, Amazon, Walmart, all these companies that are laying off thousands of workers. I mean, what are people going to do? There was an arbitrator named Sam Cagle here, a labor arbitrator here in California, and he said that when you fire a worker, it's economic capital punishment because you're pretty much taking away the livelihood, the bread off the table of that family. And then again, also with Trump laying off thousands of federal workers. And so we see workers that are being fired, that are being, again, people of color that are being detained, that are being imprisoned. And this is going to hurt the economy of the country when you don't have people working, putting money into the income stream.
Yeah, I think this ties into the question that I was going to ask about the way that today's workers can organize effectively in a digital economy. But I think the thing that you mentioned about how they're using AI to replace workers, they're using technology not to support workers, but to replace them, kind of speaks to the ways in which capitalism has sort of like corroded that, right? Like digital organizing spaces. I'm wondering, because I see this as something that both the Republicans and the Democrats have not done a really good job of doing, in terms of tapping into like the working class voter base. Do you feel like there is ways that For example, the Democratic Party can mobilize voters again in the upcoming election. I think we saw that most recently with Mandani, who really tapped into like a lot of the working class cab drivers and people of New York City. Do you see there being a pathway for the Democrats moving forward that includes the working class voting base?
Well, we just saw that happen right now in the election where you had victories in New Jersey, you had victories in Virginia, you had victories in California. This was all over the country that the voters have spoken out that they're not happy with Trump's policies, their anti-worker policies.
Yeah. So with today's political climate, do you, especially around like immigration policy, um, how do you think that like working class solidarity kind of ties into that? Because I think a lot of times people see immigration issues as almost being separate from working class and labor issues.
Well, no, they're very much the same. And I think we have to separate the two because what we're talking right now, the attacks on people of color, it's not about immigration, it's about ethnic cleansing. It's about ethnic cleansing, and the Republicans and Trump want to get as many people of color out of the country right now. They want to affect the census, for one thing. They want to weaken the people of color community, and it's an attack basically on not only people's civil rights and their legal rights and even the right to exist, you might say. And the other thing too, we have to change the narrative. The people that are being attacked, let's say they don't have the documentation to live in the United States of America, but they are not immigrants. They didn't cross an ocean to get here. These are the indigenous people of the continent. This land belongs to them. The true immigrants are the people that cross the ocean from Europe or other countries to get here. They are not immigrants.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think there is a lot of erasure of the fact that, the entity of the United States, right, occupied indigenous land. They also occupied parts of what used to be like formerly Mexico. Um, I think the point you make about ethnic cleansing is really important. But I wonder, especially within the Latino community, there's such a divide, right? Like there's all this rhetoric between Latinos that feel as though they came here the quote unquote right way or their families were here the right way versus the people who, disagree with that. What would you say is kind of like the disparity or the issue between Latinos right now when it comes to topics of immigration?
Well, that's the people that are accepting that narrative. They are swallowing the colonization narrative. Number one, of even calling them immigrants. As I said, no, we're indigenous. We're indigenous people. We are not immigrants. Our indigenous grandfathers that came from Spain and Europe. They're the immigrants. We are the indigenous people here, and we have to claim that right, that we are not immigrants. We are the indigenous people, and this land belongs to us. Number one. So let's change that language. The other thing is allowing ourselves to be divided, and trying to separate new people that came to the United States from the other generations that came here before them. I mean, when we accept this narrative, we have to understand that this is the poison that divides us. And the other poison that divides us is when we talk about the issues of abortion, when we talk about the issues of LGBT and gay marriage, these are the issues that divide us. And we have got to the Latino community, we've got to wake up and understand what is happening here. And I love to quote the words of Benito Juarez, and I hope that you can also promote this. What Benito Juarez said, respecting other people's rights is peace. I have 11 children. My daughters don't have any children. Some of them, and some of them have one or two or three. You know what I mean? But it's their human right to decide how many children they want to have. I mean, that is a woman's right. And so we've got to stop voting for people on the issue of abortion. Okay. Yeah, that's the one thing. And the other thing on the same thing with gay marriage. You know, you can be free to love, live, and marry somebody of your own sex if you so choose, or change your sex if you so choose. It doesn't affect your family. So why let people, hook us into hating people and creating that division within our own community. So we've got to stand up to the haters and say, we're not going to go with your narratives anymore.
It's so interesting that you mentioned all of these different points of contention, right? Like these topics like abortion and LGBTQ rights, especially amongst like Latino voters, there's like so much discourse around wanting to align yourself with specific parties based on these single issues. Um, and I'm wondering because, the conversation every election cycle is the Latino vote, the Latino vote. What do you think prevents like the community from often wielding their power or using it in a unified way? Why do you think that there's so much, I guess, internal division when it comes to the way in which we vote?
Well, I think that the issues that I just mentioned, abortion, gay marriage, transgender, these are some of the issues. And again, who was here first? I mean, that is so ridiculous when you think about it. And we know many of us are Catholics or come from evangelical tradition, and we have to say, look, remember this in the Catholic Church. It took them centuries, the Catholic Church, to finally realize that the Earth was round and not flat. When I remember when birth control was a sin. That's why I have 11 kids, okay? Well, when divorce was a sin, you know? I mean, so we can't follow, no, those prescripts and say, we're not going along with you guys anymore, okay? Forget that. This is a whole new era. We've got bigger things that we have to worry about, like global warming. The state of our nation, losing our democracy, the fascism that has just descended upon us full force, the fact that working people are losing their rights to even exist. Okay, now these are the big serious issues that we have. So and then we have to vote, and that the other thing too is a lot of people are not voting. We are such a huge, huge population in the state of Texas. You know, in the state of Texas, we could take over that state in a quick minute if people would just get out there and vote. So we've got what is lacking, and that was your question. Organizing, 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 civic engagement, voting. And I was just in Texas, by the way. And when I see the young Latinos that are taking office there as mayors and school boards and city council people, and yeah, they're taking the power, and it's happening not fast enough. And of course, they're making it as difficult as they possibly can for people to register to vote. In California, we got rid of deputy registrars over 50 years ago. Over 50 years ago, and still in Texas, they have to find a deputy registrar to register to vote.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned that kind of stuck out to me was like this generational sort of like evolution, right? Like you're talking about all these things that have sort of changed over time, like the sentiments around like abortion, queer rights. I'm wondering, like, everyone knows your work from kind of like a public facing perspective, but for you personally, is there anything that you feel like has changed or has evolved in terms of like you're being educated on the subject matter or versed on it and has allowed you to like grow or evolve in terms of your political stances?
Well, I think the only thing that I can say that I had a big revelation or evolution, and that is on the issue of abortion. As I mentioned, I had 11 kids, because I did believe that birth control was a sin and that abortion was a sin. And it took the feminist leaders like Gloria Steinem, Eleanor Smale, the head of the feminist majority, I am now on the feminist majority board, and I've been a founding member of that organization. But it took a while for me to get there. And again, everything is based on science. Again, having 11 children, but also having 3 miscarriages, knowing that a fetus is not a child unless it's born, you know? And according to St. Thomas Aquinas, who was one of the saints of the Catholic Church, he said that a fetus is not a child until it is born. Okay. And if we can remember that, I think that would take a lot of the pressure away from women. And we know, unfortunately, that the church is still very, very strong in our lives, and that religion, instead of helping us at this point, is hurting us. And I'm not saying all religions, but I mean, I think so, especially for women. And women are the ones that have suffered most, I think, from the teachings of various religions. Some of them are progressive than others. But the other thing too is that we really have to understand that our society has to be built around working people, because as I said before, working people are the foundation of a society. And so it's interesting that in Mexico with the new president there, and the previous president of Mexico, that the working people of Mexico are right now the focus of the government. And this is why they are so supportive of Claudia Sheinbaum and the previous president before her, because in Mexico they are really focusing on creating a better life for the workers of Mexico.
The thing that you also mentioned about, the evolution of women specifically, you've been a woman in kind of this male dominated activism space and movement space for such a long time. Um, and even with the mention of like Claudia, right? Like there's so many new up and coming, powerful, empowering figureheads that are women now. How do you see the role of women in activism evolving since you first started organizing?
Well, we have seen that in many legislatures, like California, the majority of people in our state legislature in California now are women. I think in the state of Nevada, women were actually, uh, I mean, the whole legislature was women, I may have changed now, but that's been recent. We just saw in the elections in the state of Virginia, they have now a woman governor for the first time. In the Feminist Majority Foundation, we kind of have a slogan that we will never have peace in the world until feminists take power. Okay. And I use the word feminist. And the reason I say that because we know that a lot of women, like Bondi, who's part of the Trump administration, that these are not feminists. These are women that support men and whatever they do, right or wrong. But we say the feminists who really believe in people's rights. And we know that a lot of men are feminists also. So women are not the only ones that have to be feminists, but we have to say we will never have peace in the world, we will never have justice in the world until feminists take power.
Yeah, I love that. Um, and I do feel that like the term has often been co-opted or misconstrued. And so it is so nice to see examples like yourself of women in the movement who continue to do this really important work. Um, you know, you've you've had such a long-standing role in organizing. I wonder if there is like for you, reflecting back on all of that, like one moment or a campaign that you're really especially proud of that you feel like captures um kind of like the legacy of the work that you do.
Well, I think the main thing that we have to do, and I went through that process myself, is finding the source of our power, of our individual power, and knowing that we have the power to speak up and to defend ourselves and to defend other people. And once we can go to that hidden source of our power and we act on it, once we act on that, then I mean that is all that we need. And not only as individuals, and then when we put that power together with others, this is what really, really creates the kind of a power engine that we need right now to solve all of the issues that we have. So if we could just get and people get so, I'm going to say, use the word oppressed in so many ways. And even education, oppresses us. There's a great movie. I don't know if you've seen that movie, Radical, that was made in Mexico. If you haven't seen it, about the, the, the way that this one teacher was changing education, for students. And somehow in our educational system, we kind of get intimidated and people are afraid to speak up. And it should be just the opposite. Once we have a formal education, we should feel like we have more power to speak up. But for some reason, that doesn't happen. So that's what organizing is all about. Organizing is about talking to people, explaining to them how we got into the situations that we're in, and then explaining how we're going to get out of this, how we're going to change it. but making people understand it's not going to change without you, that you are the only one that can change it. You together with other people and forming that collective power that we need. And so that is what organizing does. This is what organizing is basically uh, taking people or helping people overcome their fear. Having people overcome their apathy. Because once people can do that, then we can change everything. And we just saw that in the elections when people came out. I think people are angry. People are showing that they're not happy with what the Trump administration is doing, and they came out. They came out during the King's Day marches. We saw 7 million people that came out there in March, and so I think this is what it takes: just organizing, organizing, organizing.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the nose. Like, it's not a coincidence that the right is targeting ethnic studies curriculum. It's not a coincidence that they're targeting professors. They're really focusing a lot of their efforts in the educational space, whether it's, a grade school or high school or at the college level. But so much of that education, right, that you're talking about, the learning about the history and the context of like our world and just like the socio-political circumstances, that can happen anywhere. That can happen in organizing spaces, that can happen just by showing up somewhere and learning about something, like you said, watching a documentary.
We have to call them on it. Okay, these people want to keep the legacy of slavery. During slave times, it was illegal for people to learn how to read and write. The slaves could not learn how to read and write. And this is what they want to do now. They want to dumb down America. And they don't want people to know about the history of slavery, the history of the oppression of women and the people of color and of working people. And this is what they want. This is what they call they're anti woke, they're anti education, they're anti science. They want people to remain illiterate, you know? And so that's what we have to keep fighting against them and say, we're not going to let you do that. You know, why should we let you impose upon us your your preferences, what you like, that you like to see people of color oppressed, you like to see women oppressed, you like to see people illiterate. No, we're not going to go down that road with you.
And on top of that, you know, detaching them from like the things that make up their culture, right? And so like I recently reported on, the generation of quote unquote no sabo kids, right? And one of the things that I highlighted in this coverage was that for a lot of the generation of youth that don't speak Spanish or don't speak their parents' language, their parents were punished. They were disciplined. They were segregated in schools because they were trying to kind of beat the culture out of them, beat the lineage out of them. And um, it's so interesting because now we see almost like the opposite. We see these kind of wealthier white people who want their children to learn multiple languages, who are hiring multilingual nannies and things like that. So it's interesting how the education system like picks and favors how it applies certain rules. And it's like you said, it's obviously all embedded in like these kind of racist practices. But you're right, like we need to kind of push back and challenge that. Are you seeing like right now any really good organizing around education, around protecting, for example, like ethnic studies curriculum, or just maintaining the integrity of our education system moving forward?
Well, that's a big topic. And number one, yes, of course, we see that in California, I think studies is now a requirement. It's a high school graduation requirement, and so we do see that in many states that having cultural education is really an ethnic studies education becoming part of the curriculum is something that we need. But I think it has to start earlier than high school. It's got to be taught in the elementary school level, because this is where kids really start learning all of their beliefs and their practices. And also the thing with gender studies, we have to teach little boys that girls are equal to them and that they're not inferior to men. That has to be taught early also in the elementary school level. But the other big thing, and I'm glad that you mentioned education, because we don't realize that in our United States of America we have such a very, very weak educational system. Our defense budget is huge. Or Department of War, as Trump has just now named it, is huge. Our education budget is tiny. And even in California, and I don't know what it's like in Illinois, but in California, our prison budget is higher than our high school budget. Our prison budget is higher. And this is something that we have to do. Education has got to be number one, and the defense budget and the prison budget have got to be the last on the agenda, not the first on the agenda. So, but this is something that and at the bottom of everything that we've been talking about right now, at the basis of all of this is that we have the power to change all of this by voting in people into the Congress, into our state legislatures, into our school boards that are going to create the policies that we need and that we want, and not what the right wing and those people, the oppressors, not what they want, but what we need. But we can do it, but we just have to run for office, get our people elected, and make sure that we do the work.
Yeah, I think to that point, it's interesting because a lot of people see you as like this just kind of grassroots, like labor organizer. You're really like for the people, but you've also worked alongside like a lot of policymakers. How do you navigate that line? What has that been like for you between trying to ensure that you're remaining true to the values of your organizing and then also enacting political change?
No, the outcome of all kinds of organizing has got to be a change in policies and laws. This has got to be the outcome. It's not either or, it's one and the same. We organize we organized the farm workers so that we could change the laws so that they could have toilets in the fields, so that they could have cold drinking water, so they could be, free from pesticide abuses, pesticides poured on them, so they could have the right to organize into a union, so they could have unemployment insurance. These are all policies that were laws that we had to uh, to make happen because they were not covered by any of these policies. And the only way we could get that coverage is by passing the laws that made that happen. So it's one and the same. It's not separate. You organize so that you can change laws that will help people, so that we can elect people that are going to pass the policies that we need. And then we have to stay on top of them to make sure that the policies that we want are implemented and that there is accountability, you know, to make sure. So it's the end result of all organizing, civic engagement, policy changes. This is the end result of all organizing, whether it's the farm worker movement, the feminist movement, the environmental movement. It's an example. When George Floyd was killed, we had all of these massive demonstrations, largest demonstration ever in the history. Okay. And what happened? Were any laws changed? No, there weren't any laws changed. The police still have immunity when they kill people. So again, we've got to remember that we've got to change the laws, and so that's why it's so important for people to get engaged in voting. And sometimes people forget that this is the way you make things happen. Okay, by changing the laws, picketing, marching, protesting, organizing. That's all very important, but it's got to end in a policy change. It's got to end in electing people that would pass the laws that we need.
So, what would be your advice, I guess, to kind of wrap things up for this new generation of organizers who are looking to get involved, try to make change, like you said, create an impact, a long-term impact? What would be your words of advice for those who are looking to get civically engaged?
So my advice to them is we have between now and next year, 2026, to change the Congress, and that we have to get civically engaged, just to get out there, uh, canvass, go door to door, help with voter registration, help setting up committees in every precinct, in every neighborhood, to get people committed to start working, to work on the elections of 2026. We have time right now. We have time right now to support good candidates, people like AOC, uh, people like Bernie Sanders, people like the new mayor of New York City. Okay, I mean, these are the inspirational moments that we have, finding candidates like that, finding good people to run, and then supporting them. we can make the difference. What happened in Virginia, in California, in New Jersey, we can make that happen all over the United States of America, and we can kick out the haters, okay? And in Spanish, I like to say, podemos sacar esos güeyes del Congreso, okay? Podemos sacar esos güeyes del Congreso. We can take out all of those jerks that voted to use our tax dollars to give our money to ICE, and to detention centers and to the abuse and the killing of innocent people. We can get those guys out of the Congress right now, get our people into the Congress. We have to do it. We can do it. Si se puede.
Thank you so much for that, Dolores. One last question because I need to know, you've been so active. You're like a ray of sunshine every time I see you in person. You've got so much energy. What do you do for self-care? How do you keep regenerating yourself? What does Dolores do in her free time to keep her momentum going?
Well, what I try to do is hear live music at least often as I can, or if I can't hear it in person, hear it on the radio, whatever. Of course, hang out with my kids whenever I can. I was recently on a huge, almost 10-day traveling throughout the United States of America. We're working on the elections. I was in the state of Virginia, working on those elections over there, and I was in the Bay Area. Uh, but basically, what I try to do is get sleep and eat. If I can sleep and I can eat and get a little bit of rest in between. Uh, I'm obviously going to have to slow down eventually because I'm 95 years old now, and I got to start taking it a little bit easy. You know,
Yeah, I mean, you're an inspiration. I don't have half as much energy as you do, so whatever you're doing, keep doing it. It's working, obviously, but I love that. I love that you're a music lover and you spend time with your family and you find ways to kind of rejuvenate yourself. So we really appreciate you being here with us. Thank you so much for everything. And I'd like to leave you with the last word. Is there anything you'd like to say or share?
Yeah, I always would say we just want to tell everybody out there, remember that you've got the power. So when I end my talks, I always ask people to stand up, and tell them I'm going to ask you two questions. The first question is I'm going to ask you, uh, yeah, we have the power. What kind of power? People power. Okay, remember that we have the power. What kind of power? People power. But we have to use our people power to make the changes that need to be made. And we end with a big old "Si se puede."
And there you have it. Si se puede, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dolores.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for joining this very special episode of the Latino Newsletter podcast with Dolores Huerta. We are deeply grateful to Dolores for sharing her wisdom and perspective during such a critical moment in our political landscape. This moment calls on all of us to act with urgency, clarity, and a hope for the future. This episode of the Latino Newsletter podcast was produced by Joaquin Cotler, Juan Diego Ramirez, and Michelle Zacarias. It was edited by Julo Ricardo Varela, music by Cast of Characters via Soundstripe.
Season 2 of the Latino Newsletter podcast was made possible through individual donations and the Latino Media Consortium. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the guest and host and don't necessarily reflect those of the Latino Newsletter or its staff.